So today I'm going to be talking about CI/CD agility and controlling pipeline sprawl. So if this doesn't make sense to you, hold on. I'll go through this slide and we'll have some fun getting through it. But I did make up these terms, by the way. So if you don't understand what I'm talking about, at the title slide, it's fine. So, all right, it's already starting. Okay, so we're, as developers, right, and we're working in the DevOps space, modern day software development practices, we're expected to be working and producing things at a very high velocity. I'm sure we've all heard the terms agile, agility. So when formulating the abstract for this talk, I was trying to, emphasize the fact that, yeah, we're moving at a really fast pace compared to even 5 years ago, as far as software development goes. So when I was looking, developing the talk, I was like, sometimes you think you know the definition of words and you want to verify that you're using them correctly. So I just want to quickly show you the definition of agility. And that's basically the ability to move quickly and easily, which actually is very fitting, right, for the DevOps space. But we are in DevOps, right? And we are working with technology. And obviously, I work for CircleCl, so CI/CD is pretty much what I do day in, day out these days. So I came up with this new term called CI/CD agility, and I also gave it a definition, which wasn't much of a big change from the initial definition of agility, but my definition for CI/CD agility is the ability to move continuously, quickly, and easily, right? Which again, for me is very fitting in the space that we're working in, especially in the DevOps space. Now, in order for us to, move quickly and continuously, we have to have tooling behind this, right? Or at least the automation needs to be there, and that requires us to implement tooling such as CI/CD, right? The problem is, we do have the automation; it works, but there are some obstacles that a lot of us face when we deploy these tools, right? In the beginning, it's like anything new, right? So once you deploy new tooling, you're usually pretty happy with it. But over time, that tool can also become a hindrance because of the sheer volume and amount of data that you're dealing with within the tools, right? So when we scale, even with the automation, it becomes a problem. And I'll get into what I mean by that a little bit. But before that, my name is Rivera. I'm a developer advocate for CircleCl. And in my role, I'm always speaking to developers, right? I started off my career in the United States Air Force. I was actually working for US Air Force Space Command, which is now United States Space Command. I believe they're actually launching a rocket today. I saw it on Twitter, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to try to check that out in between other talks that I have scheduled for today. But if you get a chance, yeah, they're launching a new satellite. And this is the first launch for US Space Command, which is pretty exciting, at least for me. I'm a space nerd, so definitely love when these things happen. But anyway, in my current role with CircleCl, I'm constantly talking to individuals out in the community, right? And when I'm speaking to the folks in the communities, my role is to basically be the liaison between our tech teams, or actually all the teams in CircleCl and the community. And what I'm generally doing out there is just listening to folks and learning how they're using technology in their day-to-day lives, right? And I'm also, offering some advice if I can, if I have experience in something. And I'm also receiving advice, right, from the community. But in general, I'm like I said, I'm continuously talking to folks about technology, and that's part of developer relations. And in these conversations, over time, right? I've been with Circle for 2 years, but I've also been doing this developer relations or advocacy for probably upwards of 15 years, right? Internally in organizations and externally. But this talk is composed of pretty much those conversations that I've had in my own experiences with CI/CD tooling in general. So the main topic that came up, or at least one of the more popular ones that came up when I'm in my conversations, was basically managing pipelines at scale, right? And some of the issues around that, and how people are doing it, and then also the pain points that they're having when they're trying to manage, again, their pipelines at scale. So I'm going to be talking about that. And within that realm of managing pipelines at scale, since I only have a few minutes here, I'm going to talk about security, focus in on security, and then what I call pipeline sprawl. Let's talk about security. We all understand that security is really, really, really important. I worked in the federal government. I worked at corporations. I worked at different, big places in my career, and security was always at the forefront, and it should be, right? We need to protect our systems. We need to protect our data, but there are some issues with certain CI/CD tooling and security, right? And this is across the board, by the way. I'm not picking on any particular tools. I'm not going to go into this one or that one. I'm talking about in general what I've seen, what I've experienced, and what folks are kind of conveying to me. And within the security space of this talk, I want to talk about particularly secrets, right, and how we manage them within our pipelines and CI/CD tooling, and some of the deficiencies, and I'll give you some recommendations on how to fix that. So we understand that secrets, right, we have them embedded in our pipelines or in our systems that run our pipelines. And they provide access, right, to data and systems that we need to process when we're doing builds and testing within our builds, or maybe even doing deployments, right? Secrets are definitely a big part of getting stuff done within our day-to-day jobs, right? And within our automation as well. But we do have issues, right? Our pipelines in certain tools, right, and I would say most tools are exposed when we're talking about secrets, because there are some deficiencies, and they're just native to the tooling. But one of them, obviously, right, and these are not new problems, these are not new problems that we faced, right? We've seen this before. We've been dealing with this for probably decades now. But one of the bigger problems is weak secrets, right? And what I also call stale secrets. So passwords or secrets that are not being changed on a regular basis. These are not new problems. We've had this, like I said, for decades. Now, the issue is, how do we handle that, right? How do we get our pipelines to not have weak passwords or stale passwords? I spoke with a gentleman a few weeks ago before we got locked down, and he was telling me he hasn't changed his password or his secrets in his pipelines for like roughly about 5 years. And the reason he gave me was, I don't know what kind of effect that'll have, negative effect that'll have with other integrations into other systems. So he's got bigger problems there, in my opinion. But the fact that he has a secret or a password that hasn't been changed in 5 years, it's a problem. So one of the things I wanted to address, though, with inadequate mechanisms within CI/CD tooling, and I'm sure most of us will kind of agree or at least understand what's happening, is we have secrets in our let's say we have secrets in our CI/CD tooling. The CI/CD tooling does a good job of storing those secrets encrypted and protected at rest, right, within itself. But and it also does a great job when it's in transit. So if the pipeline needs this, the build begins and the pipeline needs a secret to be to access some other system or service. Again, the secrets at rest are usually encrypted really, really well and protected, and they're also protected in flight, right, using SSL or TLS. But once it hits that runtime for the pipeline, that's where the problems begin. In most tooling, those pipelines or those secrets are stored in that runtime, right, where your build is actually occurring, in clear text. And obviously, if that runtime gets compromised by a bad actor, you are now open for exposure. You're open for compromise and exposed. So that's one of the issues with secrets in CI/CD. Now, you're probably asking yourself, all right, so how do we adequately protect our pipelines and our secrets? And to date, we do have a solution, luckily, and it just requires us to implement secrets management. And today, there's a lot of tooling out, right? There's a lot of open source tools that you can investigate. I I'm really partial to HashiCorp's Vault. Does a great job at basically, managing the secrets and doling them out as well. Yeah, it takes a little bit of engineering, right? So you're gonna have to figure out what Vault is and how to implement it. But once you have it up and running, it's gonna save you a ton of grief and actually get you where you need to be in protecting these secrets. So what you gain by implementing secrets management is basically the ability to create strong random passwords, right, or secrets. And this is done automatically by the system, right? So there's no longer this exposure of someone, or possible exposure of people just creating passwords, because we tend to create passwords or tokens so that we can remember them, right? Or we store them in unencrypted or insecure spreadsheets on some network server that we don't know who has access to. But with a secrets management tool like Vault, you could actually randomly generate these tokens and secrets. And then you can also, to solve that stale secrets or stale password problem, you can also set the system to do auto rotation of these things, right? So let's say you have a pipeline that has secrets to your AWS cloud or your Google cloud or Azure cloud, whatever. You can use the system to set these policies where you can, randomly generate strong passwords let's say every day. And then you can also use that system to basically rotate those expire the old passwords and then rotate that out with a new one, right? So now your pipelines have an exposure window of maybe, if you set that policy for a day, now you have a 24-hour exposure window, whereas before you had an infinite one because you never change your passwords, right? Or you haven't changed them in 5 years. So that's the value you gain from implementing a secrets management tool. So that covers pretty much the security aspect of my talk. Again, I understand when folks are adding new services to their infrastructure or to their operations. But this is one that I highly encourage anyone listening to me to do, because it's really important, and it's only going to get more important. I was also speaking to someone recently about their company. It's a startup, and they're starting to work with banks, right? They're starting to work with like the big boy companies, and they're basically, they were complaining to me about how much, I would say, vetting they had to go through. And that was just the security, the company's security team vetting them and vetting the system. And after that vetting session, they had a lot of work to do to get their platform and their services up to spec, right, up to snuff, so that they could actually do business with this big company. So again, it's really important, and it's only going to get more important, especially if you're starting to play, or do business with bigger corporations and the government as well. So let's recap on security real quick, right? We definitely want to implement secrets management policies and tooling, especially for your pipelines, right? Integrate those managements, secrets managements, and create randomly generated password policies, and then also create and replace your secrets as often as possible using the tooling. All right, now we're going to talk about some pipeline sprawl. This is the bulk of the presentation. Again, I made this term up, but it was due to the fact that, CI/CD tooling, the modern CI/CD tooling today, most of them are using what we call configuration files to define and specify your pipeline execution commands, right, or your pipeline steps. These config files are fine. They live. It's a nice kind of I would say paradigm, because it lives with your code. In modern day CI/CD tooling, these config files are now really close to the code. Actually, it's in the same repository. So when your CI/CD tool is going to kick off a build, it's basically going to read this configuration file and say, all right, what do I need to do to accomplish this build? The issue with the configuration files, though, is that you have one code repo and one pipeline configuration file per repo. Now, this is just what I'm describing here is the general operation, right? How people generally operate. I've spoken to folks that have different configurations, right? They have one code repo, and then for every branch, they have a pipeline configuration file. So that means, this ratio is actually off. It could be, much higher number on the pipeline configuration side. But in general, just for the purposes of this talk, I'm going to be speaking to the 1-to-1 ratio. Now, these configuration files are basically YAML files, right? So YAML has been adopted pretty much by the cloud native type solutions, and like Kubernetes, right? It's heavy with YAML and the configuration. But the problem with YAML is people don't really understand what YAML is. I have a lot of folks that come to me and complain about YAML, and hell, even I was when I first started using YAML, I was a little, I wasn't a big fan of it until I realized what it really was. And basically, YAML is not a programming language. A lot of folks, because of its declarative nature, a lot of folks believe or seem to think that they should be able to do logic, right, or processes in there, or do some sort of compute type coding inside of YAML, which it's not meant for that, right? Because it's not a programming language. YAML is a data structure, very much like JSON, except for that it's more declarative, right? It's designed to be a human-friendly, readable. It's almost like a Python kind of syntax, right? Where it's like pretty Englishy, but for the most part, YAML is a data structure, and it should be viewed as such. And people shouldn't try to force some programming in it. I know that's our nature, right? We're developers, but you got to consider this for what it is, and it's a data structure. The problem with YAML, though, is as a data structure, and because it's so declarative, when you're executing, or when you're defining pipeline commands or inside of YAML, what we're doing is basically calling commands. So I could see where folks like bash commands, right, or executing some sort of CLI. I can see where folks get confused, or at least the lines kind of blur, because you're actually executing things, and then when you're trying to execute things, you want to set some sort of logic, like A and B. If this condition exists, right, execute this command line this way. But what happens, the reality is YAML can't do that. Aside from anchors, there's no other, like, I want to say, reuse type effect in YAML. So the syntax starts becoming very redundant. And what I mean by that is, again, if you're defining a pipeline, let's say you're defining a command to upload a file to AWS S3, and you need to change the file names. Say you have like a ton of files you're trying to upload, you're gonna have to cut and paste, right? And when you're doing that, your YAML files will grow in length and complexity, which is a real problem. And that's where I say, where I'm referring to, YAML files can become redundant. And again, they can grow in complexity. And once that happens, this YAML configuration file now becomes really, really hard to navigate and manage. I mean, I've seen folks with thousands of lines in their YAML file, right, in their CI/CD pipeline files, and it's almost impossible to manage at some point, right? It's just the sheer volume is just unmanageable. So that covers configuration, what I call configuration file, or at least YAML kind of sprawl, right? The innards of the configuration file. The other problem is what I spoke to a little bit earlier was, if you have one repository and one configuration file for your pipelines, and let's say you now have your repos grow into, let's say you have 100 repos. That's 100 configuration files now, right, that you have to manage if you're running them through your CI/CD. So imagine if you have to change one thing in all of those configuration files, now you have a what I call a sprawl problem, right? And again, when we're changing things in systems, occasionally we're doing like one-offs, right? But let's say there's a security incident that happened and you need to change something in all of your configuration files. If you're doing that manually, right, that's a couple hours at least, right? But there are folks out there with thousands of repos and configuration files. I know of a person I spoke to just recently, 3,000 repositories that they're responsible for in their organization. So that means 3,000 configuration files. So again, that becomes really difficult to maintain because of the sheer volume. And then you have this right dilemma, like how do I manage 3,000 configuration files? How do I change all of that in a reasonable amount of time? And then you could do, well, in my conversations with folks, some of them were like, well, wouldn't GitOps help you with this or solve that for you? But if you take a look at what GitOps really is, it's about working, using a repository as a source of truth so that you can do operations off of that. But that's, again, a 1-to-1 ratio. And GitOps only performs within a repo, right? So you're not really gaining anything because it doesn't really scale outside of external repos. I'm sure that in the future, this probably could be solved with some really smart people doing some reworking of GitOps, but currently I don't see it as a viable solution. Now, what are the options, right? Like, Angel, what are you talking about here? What can I do to avoid this? And to be honest, I'm a developer, right? I sat down and I thought about this problem as a developer. And as a developer, I tackled it, or at least I came up with a solution based off of separations of concern. So this is a paradigm within programming, right? Or object-oriented programming, on how to look at problems and how to design solutions for when you have to deal with multiple objects and templatizing them. So the first thing I did was I looked at the common pipeline problems, and I suggest you do this as well, right? So if you have, again, let's take the S3 upload example. If you have, S3 uploads going on in all of your pipeline configuration files, then that's a good candidate to do, to create an abstraction on, right? So because you have an S3 upload, right, occurring, you can abstract that, right? You can identify that S3 upload occurs in all of your files, and you can take that and encapsulate it. So what I mean by that is saying, all right, we do use Amazon's AWS S3, and we need to encapsulate that functionality. Once you have that, functionality encapsulated, defined, you can then add properties to it, right? You can or properties and functions to it. And you can parameterize it. So that makes it reusable, and then you can create modules or templates for that. So again, it's just object-oriented programming. Do an abstraction, encapsulate it, and then you have the parameterization and functionality that you need, and it's reusable, which is the most important piece. So now you have a one-stop shop. So, to change code, if you have issues with any of the underlying kind of, anyway, you could just parameterize and reuse that stuff. So it's no longer a cut and paste situation, and it's all good. Now, this is a good example of, I lifted this out of one of my configuration files. This is the example I was talking about, the AWS S3 function. As you can see here, this is a line, right, inside of my YAML configuration. And what I'm doing here is setting a run command, which is basically execute something. And then I'm defining it as a command with the command key there. And then it's a simple, right, AWS CLI S3 upload of a jar file into a bucket. Really simple, but imagine if I had to do that 1,000 times, right, in 1,000 different configuration files, and then I had to change it, right? That's what I'm talking about when I say pipeline sprawl. And I see a lot of folks automate that. You know, but the problem is once you start automating the automation, then you have to have some sort of validation mechanisms around that. So it's, you know, it's like a chicken before the egg or kind of problem. And it's a continual problem, right? So if you need to make changes on a regular basis, even if you automate that, right, how do you validate that that the changes you made are valid? And it's a problem. But one of the things I can recommend is not hard coding the commands inside of YAML. What I mean by that is, you know, I showed you this command, and what I mean by that is not doing this. What I would recommend you do is, again, do the separations of concerns process, create your abstractions, and then encapsulations, and then create and then create pipeline libraries, right? And that should help tremendously with what the pipeline sprawl that I'm describing here. So if you were to abstract, and create these pipeline libraries that I'm advocating, your pipeline would start looking something like this. It should look a little similar to this, where, you know, you have two run commands now, but one of them is set for just, you know, creating environment variables for your runtime, where you're naming the jar file, and then you're actually creating an environment variable as well for the bucket, right? And then from there, you can actually call out to these libraries or scripts, right? And the final command line down here. And then from there, inside of that S3 upload.sh file, I have the functionality that was calling that command line. And then I'm able to, you know, change out the file name based on these environment variables. So now I have that reusability that I was talking about earlier because of adding this, abstracting that S3 command out into a shell file, and then also abstracting out the name into the names for the file and the bucket into environment variables. So what that gains you is centrally, you know, a central way to manage all of that functionality. And you're able to, again, do like a one-stop shop for changes. So if you need to make a change to that S3 command and it's encapsulated in a shell, a script, right, in your pipelines library, then you can actually go ahead and make that change in that one file, and it'll propagate over to all of your other resources that are using that specific file, right? This isn't anything new for developers, or it shouldn't be at least, but it is kind of new for the DevOps kind of space and the CI/CD tooling space. Now I know there is Jenkins, and Jenkins has this already, but you have to kind of know Groovy, right? That's the kind of language, the language that they use in Jenkins. But new CI/CD tooling, the more modern stuff doesn't have that functionality. And maybe in the future, right, that may be something we need to look at, but I'm just giving you a solution for today, and hopefully it'll help you solve that. One of the benefits, though, of encapsulation, which I've found, was the fact that, you know, once you do that work up front and create these pipeline libraries, now you have portability. Meaning, you know, you could use this in different projects. So if you're a consultant and you create these pipeline libraries that work really, really well, you can start using them at other clients, right? Or at least have the underpinnings of that, and you can use them, you know, for your clients. The other piece to it is it minimizes the vendor lock-in, right? This is really important to me because I've been in this business a long time. And yeah, I'm not a big fan of being locked into a specific tool or vendor. And what I mean by that is if you, again, abstract all of your pipelines into a library, you can now take those libraries, right? And if you, let's say you're on XYZ vendor and you want to go to vendor B, right, for CI/CD, now you don't have to worry about divorcing, you know, all of those commands and pipelines from the configuration files. You've kind of already done that because you're just calling shell scripts, right? So now you can just, all the work's going to be up front, configuring these new, your pipelines in this new format, which is probably going to be YAML. and you're just calling out, right, to your, again, to your shell scripts or your CI/CD pipeline libraries that you created. At CircleCl, we actually accomplished this, and we built it into the platform. So we're a cloud-based, SaaS-based type CI/CD. So the idea behind Circle is companies don't have to stand up any resources, right? But what we did was we addressed this problem about 2 years ago now with the creation of a feature and product called Orbs. And what Orbs are basically parameterized YAML. So we actually outfitted our system to be able to accept YAML that's parameterized. Now, the way it works is we have what we call the CircleCl Orbs registry. And in that registry, we host the code. So think of the registry as like NPM package management, right? Or you could use even like a reference of a Docker registry, right? So we're just hosting all of this YAML, your configuration pipelines. The cool thing is we have partners that come in, and let's say if a CircleCl user and I'll pick on Pulumi, one of their users is one and the same, right? They use CircleCl and they use Pulumi. Now Pulumi has the ability to create functionality that's native to Circle for their products, right? So literally it's just an include statement, and the users are off and running using their Pulumi products within their CircleCl pipelines, which is really cool. But again, we tackled the pipeline sprawl problem by creating Orbs, which, you know, does bring a little vendor lock-in, but if you use the strategies that I outlined here today, meaning the pipeline library creation and usage, then you can actually, you know, circumvent that little bit of lock-in that's there. But yeah, check it out if you would like. I'll be on the Slack here. We're sponsored. I think we have a channel. So like, if you have any questions, please ask about registries, CircleCl Orbs in the registry. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I'm going to recap on the pipeline sprawl talk here. And so for pipeline sprawl, identify common patterns in your pipeline, right, to create that abstraction, encapsulate that functionality into parameterized scripts, and then use those scripts to centrally manage your code and your pipelines. And then, of course, right, the benefits are that you're going to be able to minimize that vendor lock-in that you have, and also adds a ton of portability to your pipelines for future use, right, and deployments. So that is all that I have.